Hey there. Picture yourself under a sky so wide and wild, it almost swallows you whole. A place where the silence is broken only by the distant howl of coyotes and the creak of a weathered cabin door. Tonight, I want you to settle in with me as we step straight into the real Wild West. Not the one spun by movie magic, but the raw, relentless world that chewed up and spit out anyone who wasn't ready. There's a secret in these dusty streets, something most legends leave out. And by the end of our journey tonight, you'll see why just making it through a single day out here is more brutal and more surprising than you ever imagined. If this kind of unfiltered history grabs you, go ahead and tap like, maybe subscribe, but only if you're truly enjoying the ride. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always amazing to see how many of us are winding down together from every corner of the world. Now, turn down the lights, get as cozy as you can, and let's slip back in time together. Because what you're about to experience might just make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the Wild West. Welcome to your first morning in the American frontier, sometime in the 1870s. You might be feeling a bit excited, after all. This is supposed to be an adventure, right? Except, the adventure starts before you even open your eyes. What wakes you isn't sunlight or the chirping of birds, but the thick, sour stink clinging to every inch of air around you. Forget any ideas of pine-scented breezes or the clean smell of open country. Out here, your nose is assaulted by a mix of sweat, livestock droppings, and something even less pleasant, raw sewage, seeping in through the cracks in the floorboards. Bathing, as you'll quickly learn, is a luxury most folks can't afford. Maybe once a month, if the weather's kind and the water barrels are full, you'll manage a real wash. But most of the time, you're just layering grime on top of yesterday's sweat. It gets worse in winter. Water freezes solid, and nobody's about to waste their drinking supply just to scrub behind their ears. Some folks will go an entire season without so much as a rinse. And you'd better believe the smell finds a way to stick to everything. Clothes, beds, even your own skin. You groan and sit up, feeling every joint in your body protest. Your bed? Don't expect a feather mattress. What you got is a sack stuffed with straw, and chances are it's alive with bed bugs. You scratch at your arms, knowing full well these bites are just part of the routine. This is the first lesson the West teaches you. Comfort is a myth. Out here, pain is a constant companion, and you'll feel it in your back, your knees, and your hands, especially after a day spent wrestling stubborn land into submission. You might think you've worked hard in your life, but nothing quite prepares you for the daily grind of the frontier. Picture 14 hours of hauling water, chopping wood, plowing fields, or digging in the dark, damp belly of a mine. There isn't a weekend to look forward to, no holidays, and definitely no such thing as paid time off. By the time most folks hit their mid-30s, their bodies are already breaking down, spines curved, hands knotted with arthritis. Out here, your strength is your only real asset. And once that goes, well, the land doesn't have much use for you anymore. Now, as you finally swing your legs onto the cold, dusty floor, you realize just how unforgiving the weather can be. If it's winter, your breath fogs in the air, and the inside of your cabin might be colder than the outside. With only a stingy fire to stretch the woodpile, you huddle in what little warmth you can find, teeth chattering. Summers are no kinder. The heat presses down like a heavy blanket. Sweat soaks through every layer you're wearing, and there's nowhere to hide from the relentless sun. Speaking of clothing, forget any romantic notion of dashing cowboys or elegant ladies strolling down Main Street. What you're wearing is probably rough spun and ill-fitting, scratchy canvas pants or denim for the men, heavy cotton shirts that rub your skin raw. For women, it's even worse. Chemises, corsets pulled tight enough to steal your breath, petticoats and long skirts that sweep up every speck of dust and manure. Most folks own just 2 sets of clothes, and those rarely see a proper wash. The fancy outfits you see in old movies, nothing but Hollywood fantasy for the everyday settler. Your stomach growls, but breakfast here won't be a hearty feast. You're lucky if you've got beans, maybe a dry biscuit, and a tin cup of coffee. And don't get your hopes up for anything gourmet. The beans are bland, maybe a bit gritty, and the biscuits are hard enough to crack a tooth. Coffee is more punishment than pleasure. Boiled until it's bitter and thick, sometimes with eggshells or a pinch of salt tossed in to cut the taste. Still, it's the only jolt you'll get to face the long day ahead, so you gulp it down and try not to grimace. Fresh fruit or vegetables? Forget it. Those are rare treats, showing up only when the season allows. Most of your diet is dried, salted, or smoked to keep it from rotting. Meat, when you can get it, might be stringy and tough, and sometimes you can taste the salt more than the beef itself. With so little vitamin C in your meals, scurvy is a real threat. Bleeding gums, loose teeth, and all the misery that comes with it. Imagine living in a place where a lemon could save your life, but you might not see one for years. Before you even think about putting your boots on, there's another daily ritual, the boot shake. You bang them against the floor, hoping nothing slithers out. Scorpions and snakes love to curl up in the dark, warm toe of a boot. One careless moment, and you're dealing with a venomous bite miles away from any real doctor. Out here, every step carries risk you never considered back home. Stepping outside, you're slapped by the raw, wide-open world. The horizon stretches forever, but instead of feeling free, you feel exposed. The elements rule this land. Thunderstorms can blow in from nowhere, flooding everything in minutes. Blizzards cut visibility to nothing, trapping you inside for days. Drought can turn fertile ground into cracked desert. No matter how hard you prepare, nature is always one step ahead. Maybe you're hoping life is easier in town, but the towns you find out here aren't the neat, organized places you might expect. They're thrown together with whatever materials are on hand. Streets are nothing but dirt tracks, turning to knee-deep mud when it rains, and kicking up blinding dust storms when it's dry. There's no sewer system, so the reek of waste lingers everywhere. Horses are the main way to get around, and their droppings pile up until they're nearly as high as your boots in some places. Flies swarm, and the spread of disease is relentless. If you think the worst is behind you, think again. Towns are breeding grounds for sickness. With no real understanding of germs and no way to keep things truly clean, illnesses like cholera, typhoid, diphtheria, and tuberculosis sweep through entire communities. Sometimes, half the town is gone before the rest even knows what hit them. Every handshake, every shared cup could mean your last day. You wander through the clamor and chaos, realizing just how far the truth is from the Hollywood version. The Wild West isn't all gunfights and gold. It's sweat, sickness, hunger, and fear. It's the daily struggle just to stay alive, with no guarantees. Out here, you learn quickly that the land doesn't care about your dreams or your toughness. It chews up those who can't keep up and leaves little room for mistakes. Let's see if you're still with me, because we're just scratching the surface. As you walk down the main street, you pass the saloon, likely one of the busiest establishments in town. In the next chapter, we'll step even deeper into the dangers, the crushing isolation, and the sheer will it took to survive another day on the frontier. Don't go anywhere. This journey is only getting more intense. You step out onto the dusty main street, boots crunching over gravel and broken glass. The air tastes like wood smoke and sweat. Right away, you notice the saloon, but not the way you'd imagine. Forget the polished brass, the swinging doors, or the cheerful piano player. This saloon is nothing but a rough wooden box. The bar is a slab of splintered pine, sticky with spilled drink and old blood, and the stools wobble under the weight of exhausted men. You wander inside, expecting a bit of Old West glamour, but the reality hits you like the stench that clings to the air. The liquor here isn't anything you'd recognize. It's not aged whiskey. It's raw, unfiltered alcohol, sometimes spiked with tobacco juice, pepper, turpentine, or even a pinch of gunpowder just for effect. One sip could leave you seeing double. If you're unlucky, it might steal your eyesight for good. The saloon isn't just a watering hole, it's a powder keg. Arguments start over nothing, a spilled drink, a sideways glance, the wrong word muttered under someone's breath. In this place, you're more likely to be killed by a drunken brawl than a formal duel. You might be picturing a classic Western showdown, two gunslingers squaring off in the middle of the street, but you can forget that myth right now. Those scenes belong in dime novels and movie scripts, not in the real world of the 1870s frontier. Most violence out here is ugly and impulsive, not scripted and honorable. Men die in the shadows, shot in the back during robberies, ambushed in alleyways, or knifed for the contents of their pockets. If you want to survive, you'll need to learn that most confrontations don't come with a warning. And here's something that'll surprise you. Although everyone carries a weapon, pistols, rifles, even knives, it's not usually for dueling at high noon. Out here, a firearm is as much a tool as it is a weapon. You'll use it to hunt your supper, fend off a hungry wolf, or signal for help if you're lost between settlements. But don't get too comfortable with that iron on your hip. Plenty of frontier towns, places you've heard of like Dodge City or Tombstone, had strict gun laws. When you hit town limits, you're expected to hand over your weapon to the authorities. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral. It didn't start because of some feud between noble lawmen and dastardly outlaws. It happened because the Clanton gang refused to check their guns at the city line. That's the real story. Most shootings aren't drawn-out affairs between skilled marksmen. They're messy, frantic, and almost always unfair. If you're waiting for a fair fight, you'll end up dead before you draw your pistol. You step back out into the sunlight, passing the doctor's office, a place that makes you shudder more than the threat of any outlaw. Medical care on the frontier is terrifying. Doctors, if you can even call them that, are often self-taught or have learned just enough to do more harm than good. Surgery is performed with a bottle of whiskey and a rag to bite down on, if you're lucky. Sterilization is unheard of. A simple cut on your hand, something you'd ignore back east, could fester and spread until gangrene sets in. Your only hope might be amputation, and even then, your chances of surviving the shock and infection are slim. Treatments are just as likely to kill you as whatever's making you sick. Bloodletting, mercury, arsenic, these are the remedies of the day. Women in childbirth face staggering odds, with mortality rates as high as 1 in 4 out in these remote places. If you need a tooth pulled, the dentist will just yank it out with pliers, no anesthesia, and you'll be lucky not to get an infection that spreads straight to your jaw or brain. Chronic pain, missing teeth, awkwardly healed bones, these are the badges of a life lived on the edge. Out here, survival isn't about being the fastest gun or the toughest guy in the room. It's about making it through each day without falling victim to 1,000 unseen dangers. Lunchtime rolls around, and your stomach reminds you that hunger is another constant companion. The restaurant isn't some bustling eatery. It's just the neighbor's kitchen, where you can buy a meal if you have the money. The food is barely edible. The meat is stringy, tough, and often a little off. Smoking and salting are the only ways to preserve it, but that doesn't always work. Vegetables, if you get any at all, are boiled to a grey Martian taste of earth and old water. Food poisoning and dysentery are common. You don't just risk an upset stomach. You risk your life every time you eat. As you eat, you can't help but overhear the low murmur of conversation. Men talk about everything: bandits, recent raids, the dangers of traveling alone. You might expect tales of constant Native American attacks, but the truth is a bit different than what you've heard. While violence between settlers and Native Americans did happen, It was far less common than popular stories suggest. In fact, settlers and the military were usually the aggressors. But the frontier is a place of collision and conflict, and tension simmers just beneath the surface. Sometimes it boils over, and when it does, the consequences are brutal for everyone involved. Outlaws, though, those are a real and ever-present threat, especially once you leave the edge of town. Law enforcement is stretched thin. A single sheriff might be responsible for a territory that takes days to cross on horseback. When trouble comes, justice is often swift and brutal. Vigilante mobs don't care much for due process. If you're accused of stealing a horse or rustling cattle, you might find yourself swinging from a tree before sunset, guilty or not. Out here, innocent until proven guilty is a joke. Most folks are just trying to survive, but the line between lawman and outlaw is thinner than you'd think. With a few coins left in your pocket, you decide to visit the general store next, hoping to pick up some essentials. The prices almost knock you off your feet. A can of peaches. That'll set you back the equivalent of $20 in today's money. Everything costs more out here, thanks to the endless miles and the danger of getting supplies past bandits, storms, and broken wagon wheels. Most people spend every cent they earn just to keep themselves fed and clothed. There's nothing left for comfort, nothing for luxury. And it's at the general store, listening to the wind rattle the loose shingles and watching the shopkeeper tally up his prices, that the isolation of the frontier really sinks in. Mail arrives when it can, which isn't often. Newspapers are old by the time they get here. The news sometimes weeks or months out of date. You could go years without hearing from your family back east. Many never do. Loneliness seeps in, silent and deadly. It eats at the mind as surely as hunger eats at the gut. The result? High rates of depression, drinking, and even suicide. The Wild West isn't just physically dangerous. It's a place where the mind can turn against itself. The sky darkens as afternoon turns to evening. You look up and see heavy clouds rolling in, the kind that promise more than just a drizzle. On the frontier, weather is another enemy. There are no forecasts, no way to know what's coming until it's right on top of you. Blizzards can trap you inside for days, freezing you to the bone. Tornadoes tear through towns like a giant's fist, leaving nothing but splinters behind. Flash floods sweep away wagons and drown the unprepared. Droughts kill off crops and livestock, plunging entire communities into starvation. Even if you're lucky enough to have a roof over your head, it's probably a leaky one. Most homes are thrown together with whatever's at hand. Sod if you're on the plains, logs if you're near the woods, rough-cut boards if there are enough trees left to spare. In winter, you shiver through the cold nights, your breath hanging in the air inside your own house. In summer, you sweat through the heat, especially if you're forced to sleep in a cramped attic. Shelter is just that, a bare minimum. It won't save you from the full force of nature. With the first drops of rain tapping at your hat, you hurry back toward your cabin. On the way, you pass a group of men trudging to the local mine. Mining is just about the deadliest job you could have. You face the risk of cave-ins, suffocating gas, accidental explosions from mishandled blasting powder, and machinery that doesn't care if you're in the way. Even if you survive the shift, you take the mine home with you, coal dust clogging your lungs, mercury poisoning your body day by day. But if you think you'll avoid danger by sticking to farming or logging, think again. Farm equipment is primitive and dangerous, with no safety features to speak of. Ranchers get gored or trampled by animals that outweigh them by hundreds of pounds. Loggers drop trees that sometimes land where they're not supposed to. Every job is a gamble with your life. You finally reach your cabin just as the storm lets loose. The roof leaks in half a dozen places, so you place buckets around the room to catch the dripping water. This is as good a time as any to refill your drinking water, if you have any left. Clean water is a rarity. Most folks drink from the same streams where they wash their clothes and water their animals. The result? Waterborne illnesses that can take you down faster than a bullet. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid are constant threats, and there's no hospital to save you if you get sick. Sitting in your dim, damp cabin, you can't help but reflect on the reality of life out here. Hollywood wants you to believe there are clear lines, heroes in white hats, villains in black. But the truth is, most people are just trying to get by. There are no grand gestures, no dramatic speeches, just grit, exhaustion, and a stubborn refusal to give up. As night falls, you reach for your only sources of light, a candle or an oil lamp. You handle them with shaking hands, knowing full well that fire is your constant enemy. One spark, and your whole world could vanish in minutes. No fire trucks, no one to call for help. Many towns have burned to the ground and rebuilt from ashes at least once. You move carefully, every sense on high alert, wishing for the safety you once took for granted. You're bone-tired as you prepare for bed. Your muscles are sore from labor you never imagined. Your stomach twists, unsettled by food that's both unfamiliar and unsafe. Your nerves are frayed by the endless threats, illness, violence, storms, and the gnawing loneliness that comes with being so far from home. You wonder, as you lie back and listen to the wind howl through the cracks in your walls, whether you'll even make it through another night. Most people wouldn't. That's the truth of the Wild West. Survival isn't a birthright. It's something you claw for, day after day, in a world that's just as likely to kill you as let you live. The next morning, if you're lucky enough to wake, you'll face all of this again, plus whatever new hardships the dawn brings. Out here, there's no guarantee. There's just you, your wits, and whatever stubbornness you can muster. And as the wind rattles your door, you realize just how small you are against a land that doesn't care if you live or die. Tomorrow, if you see it, will be another battle. The Wild West won't make it easy on you, but that's just today. The real test? That begins the moment you try to leave town. Because on the frontier, the journey itself is a whole new kind of hardship. The morning light filters through the cracks in your cabin walls, waking you from a restless sleep. Out here, morning doesn't come gently. Light seeps through the thin cracks in your cabin walls, drawing you out of a night broken by every groan of the wind and every ache in your back. You blink awake to the dull pain in your muscles, a reminder that even sleep is a luxury you can't afford to squander. There's no time to stretch or savor the day. The West isn't waiting for you. It never does. You think maybe today's the day you venture out. Leave this patchwork little town behind and see what lies beyond the horizon. Maybe you're picturing adventure, an open road, the thrill of new beginnings. I can see it on your face. But let me stop you right there. Travel out here in the 1870s isn't anything like the freedom you're used to. It's not a vacation or even a road trip. It's a test, and most folks fail it. Let's suppose you decide to head out. Maybe you want to reach another settlement. Maybe you're joining a wagon train bound for a far-off promise. Or maybe you're just curious. No matter your reason, you're about to find out how little your expectations match reality. Yes, the Transcontinental Railroad exists now, stretching like a scar between the coasts. But unless you got money burning a hole in your pocket, forget about it. That iron horse is for the well-heeled traveler and the big shipments, not ordinary folks like you. For everyone else, moving across this landscape means relying on your own 2 feet, a wagon, or, if you're lucky, a horse. And I do mean lucky. Owning a horse isn't as simple as it looks in the movies. A good one costs more than most folks earn in months of back-breaking labor. Then you need tack, feed, and, if something goes wrong, a way to deal with it. Out here, veterinary care is usually just a bullet and a lot of regret. Even if you have a horse, you'll learn fast that riding isn't a breezy gallop across rolling hills. Saddles are built for work, not comfort. After hours of jostling in the saddle, your legs will be raw and your backside will feel like it's been scraped with sandpaper. And horses startle easily. Every snake in the grass, every unexpected sound could send yours bolting, maybe leaving you on the ground with a broken arm, miles from the nearest help. If you can't afford a horse, maybe you hitch a ride in a wagon. But you can forget any image of cheerful families singing as they roll along. Wagons are brutal. There's no soft leather seats, no suspension. Just wooden wheels and hard benches. Every bump and rut in the trail rattles your bones. The constant shaking leaves even the toughest stomach, queasy, and after a few hours, you'd swear you're at sea, not on land. Most roads out here are just trails worn by earlier travelers, barely more than a pair of ruts in the dirt. When it rains, those tracks become deep, sucking mud that can trap a wagon for days. When it's dry, dust billows up so thick you can barely breathe, let alone see. Wagons break down all the time. Wheels split or axles snap, usually at the worst possible moment, and you're left stranded with nothing but your own wits and whatever tools you manage to pack. Now, maybe you're feeling bold. Maybe you signed up for the long haul west to Oregon or California, chasing that dream of land and a fresh start. You join a wagon train, and suddenly you're part of one of the biggest migrations in American history. But this journey isn't just hard, it's deadly. Out of the 400,000 people who tried their luck on the Oregon Trail between the 1840s and 1860s, about 1 in 10 never made it. Let that sink in. For every 10 hopeful souls who set out, one ended up in a shallow grave. If you want a picture of what that means, imagine this. The Oregon Trail was sometimes called the nation's longest graveyard. Some say there was a grave every 350 feet along those 2,000 miles. Markers and crosses lined the route, many without names. Families had no choice but to bury loved ones by the roadside and keep moving, because stopping too long could mean doom for the rest. Disease was the real killer out here, not the shootouts you see in the movies. Cholera, a sickness spread by dirty water, was especially vicious. It hits fast. 1 minute you're feeling fine, the next you're doubled over, vomiting and losing fluids until you're too weak to stand. There's no real cure. And sometimes whole wagon parties would lose dozens in a single outbreak. Dysentery, typhoid, and mountain fever picked off the rest, with children hit the hardest. Many families lost more than one child before the journey was over. Doctors were few and far between, and what medicine existed was as likely to harm as to help. Folk remedies and guesswork ruled the day. Sometimes the treatment was worse than the illness itself. Then there were the rivers. No one ever tells you about the rivers. You'll face the Platte, the Columbia, the Snake, each one a potential death trap. Wagons weren't built to float, but you had to get them across somehow. Sometimes there was a ferry or a shallow ford, but more often you'd try to float the wagon or force it through. Many times they tipped or sank, drowning people and animals and washing away whatever precious supplies you'd managed to keep. Now, if you grew up on Hollywood westerns, you probably expect to be ambushed by Native Americans around every bend. But that's mostly fiction. Attacks happened, sure, but they were rare compared to all the other dangers. In reality, many tribes helped travelers, trading goods and advice, or guiding wagon trains across difficult terrain. The real threats were accidents, falling under heavy wagon wheels, drowning during river crossings, or getting kicked in the head by an angry ox. Firearms accidents were also common, since most settlers had little experience with guns, but carried them anyway, just in case. The mental strain was relentless. Imagine having to bury your own child, then climb back onto the wagon and keep moving. Because if you stopped too long, the mountains would close with snow and block your way forward. Every day was a gamble. Delay too long and winter would trap you. Push too hard and someone might break or fall ill. The constant grind wore people down. Some broke under the pressure. Suicide wasn't unusual among those who simply couldn't take another day of it. Let's say you beat the odds, you survive the trail, and you finally reach California or Oregon. You might expect a reward at the end, but more often you arrive broke, exhausted, and sick. Whatever money or supplies you started with is long gone. The so-called promised land greets you with more hardship, not less. But maybe you're not aiming for the far coast. Maybe you're just trying to get to a nearby town for supplies or news. Don't think you're any safer. Even short journeys out here are risky. Bandits and outlaws look for easy targets, and lone riders or small groups are the easiest of all. Stagecoach robberies might be exaggerated in fiction, but they happened often enough to keep travelers on edge. And then there's the land itself. Flash floods will sweep away roads and travelers alike. If you find yourself in the open during a summer heatwave, dehydration can kill before you realize you're in trouble. Winter storms are merciless, and more than one party has frozen to death, caught unprepared. The infamous Donner Party, trapped by snow, resorted to desperate measures to survive, a story every settler knows and dreads. Navigation isn't as simple as following a signpost. Maps are vague or outdated, and landmarks change or vanish without warning. Sometimes guides are wrong, or they abandon you. If you get lost out here and your supplies run low, the West doesn't care. It will swallow you whole and never look back. So, you think you're ready for the road? Out here, the only certainty is hardship. Every mile tests your resolve, and most folks, frankly, wouldn't survive a day. As you travel today, you notice another aspect of frontier life that movies rarely depict accurately. The people you meet and the realities they face are far more complicated and diverse than you ever imagined. You keep moving west, dust thick in your throat, and right away it's clear. You're not surrounded by a sea of white hats and rugged, square-jawed cowboys. Take a good look around. The real Wild West is a swirling mix of faces, languages, and traditions. More like a crossroads of the world than the tidy monochrome picture you might have expected. You pass a railroad work camp, and it's not just white men driving spikes. You see Chinese laborers, faces lined with fatigue, balancing bundles and swinging hammers. They're everywhere, laying track, hauling gravel, running laundries, selling noodles from little carts. They built entire stretches of the railroads that link the continent, but they get the worst jobs and the lowest pay, always one accident or racist mob away from disaster. Keep riding, and you'll come across Mexican families tending fields or driving herds. They've been living, working, and raising generations on this land since long before it became part of the United States. Their adobe homes and Spanish prayers have roots deeper than the border. But that doesn't protect them. After the Mexican-American War, many saw their land simply taken, sometimes with forged papers, sometimes at gunpoint. Suddenly, what was theirs for generations is someone else's property, and the courts almost never take their side. Out on the open range, you notice that a surprising number of cowboys don't fit the Hollywood image at all. Nearly a quarter of the men wrangling cattle and sleeping under the stars are black. Some are former slaves, others are the sons and daughters of freedmen, and they're here for the same reason as everyone else, chasing a chance to make a living and maybe find a little more freedom. But even out here, that hope runs into hard limits. They're turned away from the best jobs, denied entry to most establishments, and reminded in 100 small ways that the open frontier is full of closed doors. European immigrants are everywhere too. Germans, Swedes, Irish, Italians. They bring their own languages, their own foods, their own ways of building barns and brewing beer. They cluster together for comfort. But out here, comfort is in short supply. Everyone is an outsider to someone, and suspicion runs deep. And looming over everything, you can't ignore the fact that this land was already home to dozens of Native American nations, each with its own history, laws, and way of life. The land you're walking on has held their ancestors for untold centuries. But now, their villages have been burned, their buffalo slaughtered, their children taken away. The numbers are staggering, maybe 15 million people before colonization, reduced to less than 300,000 by the turn of the century. Disease tears through communities. Government agents march families hundreds of miles from their homes. And when treaties promise safe land, those promises vanish the moment gold or silver is found nearby. You've probably grown up watching cowboys and Indians face off in dusty showdowns. But that's a lie carved in celluloid. The truth is much messier. Many native nations first tried to adapt, to trade, to find space alongside the newcomers. Violence usually erupted only after treaties were broken, after their land was taken, after trust had been shattered again and again. The myth of the savage attack leaves out the years of negotiation, the betrayals, the desperation that pushed people to the edge. It's not just race that shapes life out here. Gender cuts just as deep, and the stories you've heard about women on the frontier are almost all wrong. Forget the helpless schoolmarms and prim debutantes. Women here are tough as sun-dried leather, and many of them do work that would make most men sweat. Out on a homestead, a woman's day starts before the first rooster crows and doesn't let up until long after the fire dies down. She's up at dawn, milking cows and hauling water, cooking breakfast for a small army, then out in the fields, planting or harvesting alongside her husband, if she's lucky enough to have one who's still breathing. She teaches her children, sews their clothes, bakes bread, and may have to deliver a neighbor's baby or patch up a gunshot wound by lamplight. When wolves circle the livestock, she grabs the rifle. When a storm rips the roof off the barn, she's the one hammering it back on. There's no room out here for the delicate or faint-hearted. Don't think for a second that this hard work buys her freedom. In most places, a married woman can't own property in her own name, can't vote. And if her husband decides to leave, or worse, she's likely to lose her children and her home. The law almost never takes her side. A widow might have to run a farm alone, hire out her labor, or take in boarders to survive. If she's unmarried, the choices are even narrower. Teaching is one of the very few respectable jobs. But female teachers are paid less and often forced to quit if they so much as glance at marriage. Some women seize what independence they can. You'll find them running boarding houses, setting broken bones, or running small businesses. Others, thrown into desperate circumstances, end up working in the rough world of saloons and brothels. The soiled doves of the West, prostitutes as they're called, aren't the glamorous, wisecracking heroines you might imagine. Most are just trying to survive after being widowed, cast aside, or left penniless. The work is dangerous, the pay uncertain, and the risk of violence, disease, or addiction is always lurking. Even those who manage to save money rarely escape the stigma or find a way back into respectable society. Yet, the wild imbalance between men and women sometimes works in women's favor. Western towns desperately want female settlers, so you'll see communities bending rules, offering better marriage prospects, and even granting voting rights, decades ahead of the rest of the country. Wyoming and Utah, for example, throw open the ballot box to women far earlier than anywhere else. As the sun starts to slip down, you catch yourself wondering who exactly keeps order in this so-called lawless land. The answer, like everything else out here, is complicated. and probably not what you expect. Sure, some towns have a sheriff or a marshal, maybe a deputy or two. But between those scattered outposts lie miles and miles of emptiness. One sheriff might be responsible for thousands of square miles, an impossible task. He can't be everywhere at once, so he leans on the community, deputizing whoever's handy, pulling together a posse when trouble breaks out. Inside town limits, a marshal might try to keep a lid on things. But these jobs are dangerous and poorly paid. You get a mix of true believers and folks who like the power a badge brings. Some of the legends, like Wyatt Earp, walk the line between lawman and outlaw, depending on the day. Federal marshals do exist, but they're few and far between, usually chasing big crimes like mail robbery or counterfeiting. The idea of a lone marshal single-handedly cleaning up a wild town is pure Hollywood fantasy. Most of the time, justice is a group effort or a mob's business. Vigilante groups pop up whenever the law fails or moves too slow. Sometimes they stop real threats, but just as often they're an excuse for settling scores, enforcing prejudice, or unleashing chaos. The fast-draw duels you've seen in westerns almost never happened. Violence is more likely to break out in a drunken brawl, a family feud, or a land dispute. It's messy, sudden, and far more tragic than thrilling. If you get caught on the wrong side of the law, the punishment is grim and unforgiving. Hangings are common for murder, rape, and sometimes just for horse theft. Jails do exist, but they're filthy, cramped, and deadly. Disease and violence claim plenty of inmates before any trial happens. Most communities figure it's cheaper and safer to execute someone on the spot rather than feed them for months. Now, as dusk settles and you start thinking about where to spend the night, the reality of frontier accommodations hits hard. If you're lucky enough to reach a town, you might find a hotel or boarding house. Don't picture anything fancy. A nice room is a rickety bed, possibly alive with bedbugs, a chipped basin for washing, a single chair, and walls so thin you can hear every cough and murmur from your neighbors. The outhouse is out back, shared by everyone. Privacy is a rumor. Sometimes you'll end up sharing a bed with a complete stranger, especially if the place is crowded. Sheets aren't always changed, and your only light may be a dim candle or flickering oil lamp. At the end of a long, brutal day, this will still cost you a hefty chunk of your wages, 25 cents to $1, which for many folks means going without supper. Plenty of travelers skip the luxury of a bed altogether. They sleep in barns, stables, or right under the stars to save money, even though that comes with its own set of dangers. If you're out in the open, you have to make camp. That means finding enough wood for a fire, harder than it sounds. Cooking a meal with whatever you've got left in your pack, and rolling up in a blanket on cold, unforgiving ground. The truly experienced native peoples, seasoned scouts, old soldiers, know how to build a safe camp. Most newcomers, though, make mistakes that can be fatal. Fire is both friend and enemy. Build it too hot, and you risk setting the prairie ablaze, destroying everything in its path. Too small, and you'll freeze when the temperature drops. Cooking over a campfire is a test of patience and luck. Most meals wind up burnt on the outside and raw in the middle, all while you're swatting at mosquitoes and listening for anything creeping in the dark. When night falls for real, the world out here changes. The shadows stretch, the air cools, and the wilderness starts to announce itself. Coyotes yip and howl somewhere out there. A strange bird cries. The wind slips through the grass, carrying whispers and warnings. If you grew up surrounded by streetlights and the hum of city life, the darkness here is almost crushing. It's so complete, so absolute, that distance and shape vanish. Your mind starts to play tricks. Every rustle could be a wolf, a thief, or something worse. Sleep, if it comes at all, is thin and restless. Some people lie awake, heart pounding, imagining what might be moving just beyond the edge of the firelight. Attacks by native bands are rare, but not unheard of, and they usually come at dawn when you're groggy and vulnerable. Wild animals, like wolves or bears, know that a camp means food. Snakes and scorpions seek out the warmth of a sleeping body. Even if nothing actually happens, just the fear of what could happen keeps you on edge. This constant alertness wears you down. It's not just your muscles that ache after a day on the trail. It's your nerves, too. Diaries from the time are full of people admitting how exhausted they feel, not just from hard labor, but from never being able to fully relax. In a world without locks, alarms, or even neighbors close by, you're always exposed. You'll never take a secure night's sleep for granted again. As you lie awake, listening to the chorus of the wild, you can't help but reflect on how different this is from the stories you grew up with. The Wild West wasn't a stage for adventure. It was a grinding test of endurance, where mistakes cost lives and every day survived was its own kind of victory. Navigation, repairs, basic safety. Nobody hands you a manual, and one wrong choice can end everything. The darkness thickens. The sounds get stranger, more ominous. You wonder if you'll make it through to morning, or if you'll be just another nameless soul lost to the elements and the unforgiving wilds of the West. There are no second chances out here. The land is relentless, and mercy is in short supply. Surviving the night becomes your only goal. But dawn is always coming, whether you're ready for it or not. And with it, a new set of trials. The grind of mining, the struggle of ranching, the backbreaking reality of farming, none of which resemble the romantic images you might be carrying with you. The new day dawns on the frontier, and you've somehow survived the night. But don't get comfortable. The hardest work is just beginning. Your muscles are stiff. Your back aches from sleeping on the hard ground or a creaky cot, and a cold wind seeps through the cracks in your shelter. Out here, just making it through the night can feel like a victory in itself. You sit up, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and try to decide what path you'll take today. You've got the same choices everyone faces out here: mining, ranching, or farming. Each one promises a shot at fortune, or at least a way to survive. But before you get too carried away with dreams of quick riches or the simple life, you need to know what you're really signing up for. Out here, nothing comes easy. Maybe, like so many before you, you're lured by those stories of sudden wealth, tales of men stumbling onto gold nuggets as big as your fist, or veins of silver that run like rivers through the mountains. You've heard about the California gold rush, the Comstock lode in Nevada, and the booms in Colorado. You picture yourself striking it rich overnight. Trouble is, you're about 20 years too late for easy pickings. By the 1870s, all the best claims are already spoken for. If you want a shot at mining, you'll have to find a patch of land no one else has touched, and that's getting harder by the day. Let's say you decide to try it anyway. First, you'll need to stake a claim. That means hunting for unclaimed ground that might still hide some gold or silver. Then racing to the nearest government office to register it. You'll pay fees that can eat up what little money you brought west, and there's always the chance that some sharp operator will try to jump your claim the moment your back is turned. Out here, law and order is flexible, and a piece of paper stamped by some half-drunk official might not mean much if a stronger, meaner crew decides they want what you've found. But let's say you've managed to stake your claim and hold on to it. Now the real work begins. If you're panning for gold in mountain streams, get ready for endless hours hunched over icy water. Your hands will turn red and raw, cracked and bleeding from the cold and the grit. Your back will scream from bending over, and your clothes will be soaked through before the sun's even high in the sky. You might sift through buckets of gravel all day, only to come away with a few glimmers of gold so tiny they barely cover the cost of your next meal. If you decide to go deeper, literally, you're in for even more trouble. Hard rock mining isn't just backbreaking, it's downright deadly. You'll carve tunnels into the mountainside, shoring up walls with whatever scrap lumber you can find, always wondering if today's the day the ceiling comes crashing down. Cave-ins are a constant threat, and out here, there's no rescue team coming if you get trapped. The air in those shafts is thick and stifling. Invisible clouds of gas, carbon monoxide, sulfur, who knows what else, build up in the darkness. You won't smell it, you won't see it, but it'll choke you out before you know you're in danger. The noise is relentless. The only way to break through solid rock is with black powder or dynamite, and every blast sends shards of stone flying like shrapnel. If your timing is off by a second, you could lose a hand, an eye, or your life. The explosions echo through the tunnels and leave a ringing in your ears that never really goes away. Plenty of miners go deaf from the constant roar, and even if you manage to avoid the big disasters, the little ones add up. Day in, day out, you breathe in rock dust that settles deep in your lungs, a slow poison that leaves you coughing for breath, year after year, until you can barely climb out of bed. Gold mining often means handling mercury, a toxic metal that seeps into your skin and nerves, turning your hands to trembling wrecks and your mind to mush. If you're working in copper or lead mines, the metal builds up in your body, eating away at your health until you're a husk of yourself. Now, you might think someone's looking out for you. Maybe there's a rule book, or an inspector, or at least some basic safety gear. Not a chance. Mining companies care about one thing: getting ore out of the ground as fast as possible. If you get hurt, you're just another body in a long line. Medical care is rudimentary at best. A few bandages, maybe a bottle of whiskey if you're lucky. A serious injury means you're done, left to fend for yourself, with no compensation and no way to earn a living. Out here, a broken leg or a mangled hand isn't just an inconvenience, it's a death sentence. You might be wondering, with all this risk, what's the payoff? The truth is, most miners barely scrape by. The old stories of lone prospectors striking it rich are just that, stories. By now, most mining is run by big companies, and you'll be just another laborer, working 10 or 12 hours a day for a couple dollars if you're lucky. Meanwhile, the real money flows to the saloon keepers, the merchants, and the women running the boarding houses and brothels. They get rich selling you supplies, drinks, and a few minutes of comfort while you break your back in the mines. Let's not forget the mining towns themselves. If you're picturing tidy streets and bustling markets, think again. These places are wild, rough, and rowdy. Most residents are young men, frustrated and desperate, living hard and dying young. There's no real law to speak of, and violence is as common as dust. Fights break out in the blink of an eye, over a card game, a woman, or a claim dispute. Stabbings and shootings are weekly events. With few families or churches to keep order, the saloons are always full, and the average miner drinks more in a week than most folks back east do in a year. Sanitation? That's a joke. Human waste and garbage pile up in the alleys and the streams. When the summer heat rolls in, the smell is enough to turn your stomach, and the flies come in clouds. Disease spreads like wildfire: typhoid, cholera, dysentery. In a bad season, half the town can be laid out flat. If you make it to payday, banking is its own gamble. Most towns don't have real banks, and you're forced to carry your gold or silver dust with you everywhere you go, which paints a big target on your back for every thief and bandit in the territory. A few enterprising shops and saloons might offer to buy your gold, but they'll pay you a fraction of what it's worth. And if you do find a bank, don't trust it. There's no guarantee your money will be there tomorrow. Many so-called bankers are just con men who'll take your deposit and disappear in the night, Paper money is issued by private banks and changes value depending on the wind. Counterfeit bills flood the market, and even the sharpest merchants get fooled. Gold and silver coins are the safest bet, but lugging them around just makes you more of a target. Maybe you've heard enough about mining and decide to try your luck with cattle instead. The open range, the booming beef market, the promise of wide open spaces. It all sounds a lot more appealing than choking on dust and dynamite. The cattle industry is booming, with herds moving north to feed the growing cities of the east. Maybe you imagine yourself as a cattle baron, or at least a respected rancher. Well, let's pump the brakes for a second. Ranching isn't for the faint of heart or the light of wallet. First off, you'll need a lot of money up front: land, livestock, fencing, tools, and a decent set of buildings to keep the animals and yourself alive through the winter. Most folks go deep into debt just to get started, betting their future on a few good seasons and a little bit of luck. But luck is fickle out here. Droughts can turn your pastures to dust, leaving your cattle to wander in search of water until they drop dead. If you're unlucky enough to hit a bad winter, like the infamous die-up of 1886, when the snow piled so high and the cold lasted so long that nearly all the cattle on the northern plains froze or starved, your entire investment can vanish overnight. Even in good weather, disease can sweep through your herd like a brush fire. Texas fever, anthrax, and other plagues have no cure, and a single sick cow can mean disaster. Predators, wolves, coyotes, mountain lions, are always on the prowl, snatching up calves and sometimes full-grown steers. Poisonous plants and hidden quicksand can cull your herd just as quickly. And then there are the dangers of the cattle drive itself, which Hollywood loves to glamorize. Picture yourself on a cattle drive, moving thousands of animals across hundreds of miles to the nearest railroad town. Sounds romantic, right? In reality, it's a living hell. Cowboys are mostly teenage boys, hired for a pittance, maybe $30 a month, and work to the bone. They ride from dawn till dusk, sometimes sleeping in the saddle, pushing the herd through rain, mud, snakes, and the constant threat of stampede. One wrong move, one flash of lightning or a sudden noise, and the whole herd can bolt, turning into a wall of panic that'll trample anything in its path, cowboy or cow alike. River crossings are especially deadly. Cattle panic in deep water, piling on top of each other until the weaker ones drown. Cowboys get swept away trying to save them. Most cowboys don't live long. Between accidents, sickness, and the occasional bullet, the jog chews up and spits out men faster than the newspapers back east can print their obituaries. And if you're picturing yourself as the classic cowboy hero, white, fearless, and free, think again. Many cowboys are black, Mexican, or of mixed descent, often pushed into the job by discrimination elsewhere. They get the hardest tasks and the worst pay, and their stories rarely make it into the dime novels. The food is nothing to write home about: salt pork, beans, and dry biscuits, day in and day out. Fresh vegetables are a rare treat. Medical care is whatever the cook happens to know about home remedies, and an infection or a broken bone can mean the end. No one is coming to save you or nurse you back to health. Out here, you either keep moving or you're left behind. Maybe you're thinking, surely farming must be a safer bet. The land is free, thanks to the Homestead Act, and growing food seems like the most basic, steady way to survive. But don't let the promise of 160 acres fool you. In the arid, windswept plains of the West, that much land might barely keep a family afloat. Out east, farms flourish with regular rains and rich soil. Out here, you face drought, dust, and a climate that doesn't care about your plans. The first thing you'll need is a place to live. With trees few and far between, you'll build what's known as a sod house, basically blocks of prairie grass and soil stacked into walls. These soddies are dark, dank and cruel with bugs and snakes. When it rains, water seeps through the roof. The walls crumble if you don't patch them constantly. Every night, you hear the scuttle of mice and insects in the darkness. Then comes the real work, breaking the land. Prairie sod is tough, held together by roots that have grown undisturbed for centuries. With the plows and tools most settlers can afford, it can take you a year just to clear enough land to plant a few acres. The labor is so grueling that many farmers end up with permanent injuries, bad backs, twisted joints, hands scarred by blisters and cuts. If you manage to plant a crop, don't count on seeing it to harvest. Drought can kill your plants before they sprout. A sudden flood can wash away an entire season's work overnight. Early frost can destroy your fields just before harvest. And then there are the grasshoppers, clouds of them, darkening the sky and devouring every blade of green. They'll eat your crops, your garden, even the handles off your tools if you leave them out. You'll watch months of work vanish in a single afternoon. And that's just the weather and the bugs. Disease lurks around every corner. If someone in your family falls ill during planting or harvest, you might not make it through the winter. There's no hired help and no one to step in if you can't work. Women often labor in the fields right up until, and sometimes even after, giving birth, because the work won't wait. Injuries are common, and with no doctor for miles, even a minor cut can turn deadly. Accidents are a constant threat. Homemade tools break and slice open skin. Animals panic and trample anyone nearby. Even something as simple as storing grain can be fatal. More than a few farmers have suffocated after falling into a storage bin, or being crushed when a poorly built granary collapses under the weight. Out here, you learn fast that every task carries risk. Then there's the loneliness. Your nearest neighbor might be 5 miles away, and you could go weeks without seeing another soul. For women especially, the isolation is crushing. Some go months without speaking to anyone outside their family. Depression and what folks called prairie madness set in, driving people to abandon their homes, or worse. And let's say you beat the odds. Your crops grow, you stay healthy, and you manage a harvest. Now you face the final hurdle, getting your goods to market. The nearest town might be a day's journey away, and without refrigeration, you need to sell or preserve your food before it spoils. The railroad companies and big agricultural firms control the prices and the shipping. They keep your profits low and your costs high, squeezing family farmers until many are forced to give up. So, after all that, you might be wondering, how did anyone survive out here? The truth is, most didn't. For every story of success, there are dozens of failed claims, abandoned ranches, and empty sod houses left behind by folks who just couldn't make it work. The Wild West wasn't a playground for adventurers. It was a test of endurance, grit, and sheer stubbornness. Now, as you stand at this crossroads, it's clear that none of these paths, mining, ranching, or farming, are anything like the Hollywood version. Each choice is a gamble with your health, your sanity, and your future. Out here, you don't get to pick the hardships you'll face. They come for you, one after another, and only the toughest survive. But as the 1870s roll on, a new possibility starts to flicker on the horizon. Towns are growing, railroads are stretching across the plains, and another way of scraping out a living is starting to appear. Maybe you've had enough of staking claims and chasing cattle. Maybe you're ready to try your luck at wage labor, working for someone else in these bustling frontier towns. That path comes with its own set of challenges, but for some, it's a welcome escape from the back-breaking isolation of the open range. Let's set aside your ideas about steady work for a minute. By the 1870s, some folks on the frontier began turning to wage labor in the growing towns. Maybe you thought this sounded like the safer bet, a little more predictable than throwing your lot in with cattle, crops, or the next gold strike. You probably pictured a paycheck at the end of the week, a roof over your head, maybe even a few less bruises. But let me tell you, wage work on the frontier didn't mean safety, and it sure didn't mean comfort. Step into a frontier factory, mill, or workshop, and you'll see what I mean. No one's checking the machinery for loose bolts or missing guards. There's no boss reminding you to tie off your harness before you climb, because there aren't any harnesses, and no one's even invented the hard hat yet. You breathe in the smell of hot oil, sawdust, and sweat. Steel teeth spin inches from your fingers without a single safety shield in sight. In these places, people lose hands, eyes, and sometimes their lives, all in the blink of an eye. If you're unlucky, you'll hear the sickening crunch of bone from the other side of the shop floor, and you'll just keep working, because there's no compensation, no sick leave, and no one to take your place. Take a look at the new railroad crews if you want to see real risk. Track layers sweat under the sun from dawn till dusk, swinging sledgehammers and wrestling iron rails in the heat, breathing dust until it lines your teeth. You might be laying track in the middle of nowhere, tools battered, water running low, and nowhere to rest but a patch of dry grass. And the work doesn't stop for the weather. Blizzards, thunderstorms, or choking heat, you keep swinging, because if you fall behind the schedule, the company finds someone else who won't. And then there are the men, and sometimes boys, sent up high to work on new buildings, inching along beams with nothing but their own balance to keep them alive. You hear the stories, a single misstep, a rotten plank, and they're gone. No one pauses to mark the spot. No plaque goes up. Just a quick prayer and back to work. The most dangerous jobs of all often went to the Chinese laborers. If there was a tunnel to blast or a mountain to carve out, it was their hands packing the powder, their bodies closest to the blast. The pay was worse, the hours longer, and the risk, well, let's just say the tracks aligned with the stories of men who never got their names on a sign. Now, about those hours. Forget your ideas about 8-hour shifts or weekends. For most folks, a day's work meant 10 to 12 hours, 6 days a week, sometimes more, if the boss was feeling greedy, and they usually were. The pay? Not enough to get ahead, just enough to keep you alive. You might manage a few coins left by Sunday, but it never stretches as far as you hope. Don't think the kids are spared. Children as young as 8 or 9 line up at the factory doors, their faces pinched, their hands small enough to fit into tight gears and crevices adults can't reach. They work the same hours, but with less strength and more danger. If they get hurt, the foreman just shrugs and pulls in someone else. No laws protect them. No rules say when enough is enough. You might ask, well, why not just quit and go somewhere else? That's the thing. Employers could cut your pay without warning, or fire you for any reason, or no reason at all. If you complained, you'd find yourself blacklisted, your name whispered from one boss to another, marked as a troublemaker. In a place this small, that's a sentence to hunger. Now, let's talk about company towns. You might have heard the phrase and thought it sounds neat, a place where everyone works together. But most of these were traps, not communities. The mining or lumber boss owns every house, every store, every patch of ground. You pay rent straight back to the company, buy your flour and beans at company prices, which are always higher than anywhere else. Sometimes they don't even pay you in cash, just scrip, a kind of company, money, only good at their own store. You try to save, but the costs keep going up, and pretty soon you realize you're just working to stay afloat, never getting closer to freedom. All this, mining, farming, wage work, it doesn't matter. Shapes you in ways you probably can't even imagine. The biggest shock for most newcomers is just how differently time moves out here. You're used to clocks and schedules, everything measured to the minute. Not so on the frontier. There aren't many clocks, and the ones around usually don't work. Your days stretch and shrink with the sun. You rise at dawn, work till the light fades, and sleep when it's gone. In summer, that means you're up before the birds and still working as the bats come out. In winter, the days are short, and sometimes you're stuck inside, keeping the fire alive and waiting for the thaw. Work isn't measured by the hour, but by what needs doing. One more field to plow, another mile of fence to mend, a wagon to fix before the snow sets in. During harvest or roundup, you might work from sunrise to midnight, night after night, with only a few hours of sleep in between. When the worst of winter settles in, there's less to do for some, but the boredom and worry can eat at you just as much as the labor. Punctuality, the way you know it, barely exists. Morning, or after supper, is as specific as anyone gets. When the stagecoach or train rolls in, well, then you see folks checking the time. But outside those rare events, it's all guesswork. The seasons and the weather call the shots, not your pocket watch. After all that, you might be wondering what people do for fun, if anything. Don't expect theaters or bowling alleys. After a day like this, most folks are too tired for much more than a slow conversation by the fire or a few hands of cards. If you're lucky, there's a fiddle or harmonica in town, and you might squeeze in a dance once in a while. Books are precious, pass from hand to hand until the pages wear thin. A single newspaper might make the rounds for weeks, every word devoured by anyone who can read. Sports are simple, baseball played with a ragged ball and a stick, wrestling matches in the dust, maybe a shooting contest if there's ammo to spare. Kids make up games with rocks, sticks, or whatever they can find. The big holidays, 4th of July, harvest festivals, Christmas, those are the rare times the whole community comes together. You'll see neighbors you haven't spoken to in months, share a meal, hear a speech, maybe watch a race or two. For a moment, the grind fades, and you remember what it's like to feel alive. As the sun drops behind the hills, the exhaustion sets in. You feel it in your bones, in your skin roughened by wind and work. This land demands everything from you: strength, smarts, and a stubborn will to push on, even when you want to quit. It's not just the physical work, though there's plenty of that. It's the loneliness, the constant uncertainty, the knowledge that one injury, one bad decision could end it all. People out here survive by grit more than luck. Night falls and something strange happens. The world goes quiet in a way you've never heard before. No engines, no distant traffic, not even the faintest hum of electricity. Just the wind rustling through the grass, the steady chorus of insects, and maybe a coyote calling from the hills. If you listen close, you hear your own heartbeat, steady, a little faster than usual, maybe from all you've seen today. In that silence, under a sky so dark, it looks like someone spilled a bucket of stars. You finally understand one thing. Hollywood never showed you. The frontier wasn't a place for larger-than-life heroes. It was built by ordinary men and women who endured what most today could not, decade after decade, with only their wits, muscle, and whatever hope they could hold on to. As you lie back and watch the Milky Way sweep from horizon to horizon, you have to ask yourself, could you really have survived out here, year after year? Or would the land have taken more than you could give? The cool night air wraps around you, and for a moment, you're just another soul beneath the endless western sky, wondering what tomorrow will bring. And speaking of tomorrow, morning always comes. And out here, morning means hunger. In the next chapter, we'll find out just what it takes to fill your stomach, grow up, and stay alive on the hungry edge of the American frontier. You wake up hungry again, and that gnawing emptiness in your gut is more than just a morning inconvenience out here. It's a daily reminder that survival in the Wild West is a constant battle. Forget the idea of strolling into a general store and choosing whatever you fancy for breakfast. Food in the 1870s West isn't about variety or enjoyment. Here, It's about what you can get your hands on and what you can keep from spoiling or being stolen by pests. Let's talk about hunting first, because that's probably what you imagine. Rabbits and deer practically lining up to be dinner. And yes, wild game is still around, but only for those who can hunt it. That means you need a gun, and every shot fired is a decision. Ammunition costs hard cash and might be needed to defend your life, not just fill your belly. Plus, every hour you spend out tracking game is an hour you're not tending fields, fixing fences, or hauling water. For most families, hunting is a rare luxury, rarely the backbone of their diet. So what do you actually eat day after day? Beans, corn, and pork, over and over again. Maybe you get some dried apples if you're lucky, or you grew an orchard. But most days, it's those same staples. They fill you up, but they don't provide everything your body needs. Fresh fruits and vegetables are a treat, and only for a short part of the year. Once the frost sets in, your diet shrinks to whatever you've managed to store or preserve, and that's when things get really tough. Vitamin deficiencies are a quiet killer out here. Scurvy, caused by the lack of fresh produce, shows up with bleeding gums, loose teeth, aching joints, and if you're unlucky, it ends with your death. You can see it in the older folks, in the way they move, in their missing teeth. Kids don't always grow right, and adults are worn out long before their time. The food keeps you alive, but it doesn't necessarily keep you healthy. Preserving food is an art and a race against time. With no refrigeration, anything fresh is ticking down the days before it spoils. Meat is smoked, salted, or dried until it's tough and chewy, sometimes barely recognizable. You eat it anyway, because that's what you have. The heavy salt in your diet might keep the meat from rotting, but it doesn't do your heart any favors. Women especially spend endless hours in the heat of summer boiling, fermenting, and drying whatever they can. Also, there'll be something to eat when the land freezes over. Vegetables go into vinegar or are left to ferment in crops. Fruits are sliced and laid out to dry in the sun. If you can spare any sugar, maybe you'll make jam. Root vegetables, carrots, potatoes, turnips, get buried in cool, dark cellars dug right into the earth. These aren't just chores. They're the difference between surviving the winter or going hungry. If you do it wrong, you risk an entire season's food going bad and, with it, your family's best chance at making it through to spring. But even when you do everything right, there's another enemy: pests. Rats and mice chew their way into your stores, eating what they can and fouling the rest. Insects crawl into your flour and beans, and their parts end up in your bread and stew, whether you see them or not. That's just life here. You learn to sift out the biggest bits and ignore the rest. Modern folks would turn their noses up at food like this, but when you're starving, you don't have that luxury. You eat what's there, bugs and all. Cooking a meal is a full-body workout, not a quick push of a button. You hunch over an open hearth or a smoky wood stove, sweating in the heat and praying there's enough fuel to get you through. If you're living out on the prairie, wood is scarcer than gold, so you send the children out to collect dried buffalo chips or twist grass into bundles that burn fast and hot. Every pot of beans, every loaf of bread is paid for with hours of labor and sore muscles. Water isn't on tap either. Someone, usually you or a child, has to lug buckets from the nearest well or creek day after day, hauling hundreds of pounds just to have enough for cooking, cleaning, and drinking. It's heavy, back-breaking work, and in the summer it's an endless, sweaty march. In winter, the water might freeze before you can even get it inside. Spices are a fantasy for most. Pepper, cinnamon, anything like that is precious and measured out by the pinch. Sugar and coffee, don't even think about wasting them. You might hoard a little for Christmas or a birthday, but day to day, they're too rare to use. Milk on the table means you're lucky enough to have a cow that's producing, and even then, only for part of the year. Most children grow up on watered-down milk, or none at all. With all these hardships, you might think people would turn to food for comfort. But the truth is, there's no room for indulgence. Obesity is almost unheard of, not because people are healthier, but because constant hard work and a scant diet keep everyone lean, sometimes dangerously so. You see sharp cheekbones, thin wrists, and hungry eyes everywhere. Calories keep you moving, but they don't always keep you strong. Now, if you imagine childhood as a time of play and learning, the frontier will set you straight. Kids here grow up fast, there's no other option. By 6 or 7, they're already working, gathering eggs, fetching water, watching younger siblings, or weeding the garden. These aren't chores for pocket money. They're what keep the whole family afloat. A lazy child is a liability, and there's no room for that out here. By the time they hit 10 or 12, they're working almost as hard as the adults. Boys follow their fathers into the fields, the barn, or the workshop, learning by doing, not by reading. Girls shadow their mothers, mastering the skills of survival, making clothes from scratch, rendering fat for candles, boiling soap, and preserving every scrap of food. Childhood is brief, replaced by responsibility almost as soon as a child can walk and carry a bucket. There's no sheltering kids from the harshness of life. They witness births and deaths, animal slaughter, and even violence between neighbors. Death is not hidden away. It's a fact of life, and children learn to accept it early. If an animal needs butchering, they watch. If a sibling falls ill, they help care for them, even if the outcome is grim. You don't protect them from reality, you prepare them to survive it. Schooling is a luxury, and for many, it's barely more than a rumor. In a town, you might find a schoolhouse, open for a few months during the slow season, when there's less farm work. One teacher, sometimes barely older than the oldest students, tries to wrangle kids from 5 to 17, all in one drafty room. Heat in winter is a joke, and in summer, you sweat through your lessons. Supplies are scarce, maybe a few battered books, a slate to write on that you erase and reuse until the lines blur. Scraps of paper you treat like gold. Discipline is strict, and corporal punishment is the rule, not the exception. Whispering, failing to memorize a lesson, or just daydreaming can earn you a whipping. Nobody questions it. It's just the way things are. If you live too far from town, there might be no school at all. Some parents teach their children at home with whatever books they have. But for many, education is learning to do what needs to be done. Tracking game, reading the weather, treating wounds, and planting crops. These lessons are a matter of survival, not self-improvement. But the greatest hardship for children and parents alike is death. About 1 in 4 children won't live to adulthood. The littlest ones are the most at risk. Diseases like measles, diphtheria, scarlet fever, and whooping cough sweep through families and leave empty cradles behind. Modern medicine could save them, but out here, a fever or a cough is often a death sentence. Accidents are just as deadly. Child safety isn't a concept. Children climb trees, herd cattle, and handle sharp tools from the time they can grasp them. Broken bones, drownings, and burns are all too common. The grief left behind is hard to describe. Children grow up watching siblings die, and parents learn to expect loss as a part of life. Sometimes, if a child dies young, their name gets passed on to the next baby, as if the family's hopes are recycled along with the name. It might sound strange, but it's a way to keep moving forward when death is always close at hand. You might look at all this and wonder how anyone could endure it. But on the frontier, survival means adapting, hardening your heart, and finding moments of joy where you can. Maybe a rare sweet treat, a story told by firelight, or a harvest that lasts through the winter. These are the things that keep families going, even as daily life grinds them down. And yet, all these physical hardships are only one part of the story. The isolation, the constant threats to health, and the need for community support shape life just as much as food and work. Perhaps nothing illustrates the gulf between frontier and modern life more clearly than approaches to health and medicine. Let's take a closer look at what health and medicine are really like out here. Nothing will ever prepare you for how different health and medicine are out here on the frontier. You step off the coach, fresh from the city, and you might think the nearest doctor is just a ride away, or that some neat little hospital stands ready to patch you up. But out here, that's about as likely as rain in the desert. If you get sick or injured in the 1870s West, you'll quickly realize you're on your own. Most towns don't even have a doctor, and if they do, you better hope he's sober and not still learning on the job. The truth is, many so-called doctors in these parts never saw the inside of a real medical school. A short apprenticeship, or maybe a few months at a shaky medical college, is all they had under their belt. Their knowledge is old, too, think closer to medieval bloodletting than anything you'd recognize from a modern hospital. So what happens when you catch a fever or break a bone? The answer is, you don't get rushed to an emergency room. Instead, you'll find yourself relying on home remedies and folk cures. Most of them passed down from mothers and grandmothers, who learned from their own mothers and grandmothers. Every settlement has that one woman, or maybe a handful, who knows her way around roots and poultices. Sometimes these concoctions work, herbal teas that actually ease a cough, or a salve that helps with a burn. But more often than not, what you're swallowing is as likely to make things worse as better. You'll see some wild things called medicine out here. Take bloodletting, for example. If you come down with a fever, someone's bound to think draining a few pints of your blood will set you right. Usually, it just leaves you weaker and closer to death. Then there are strong purgatives, those nasty brews that send you running for the privy, supposedly to flush out bad humors. But all they really do is leave you dehydrated and miserable. Poultices get slapped on wounds, sometimes with whatever's at hand, and all too often they just drive in more dirt and infection. Now, if you're hurting, folks will reach for the laudanum. That stuff is an opium tincture, basically liquid painkiller, and folks swear by it. Problem is, it's addictive as the day is long. You'll see people nodding off, their pain dulled for a while, but the cost is high and the habit's hard to shake. Mercury's another favorite. They mix it into treatments for everything, from constipation to toothaches. They don't know it's poison, they just know it's strong. It's not uncommon for a bottle of medicine to be mostly alcohol either. Some of those patent medicines you see advertised in the back of newspapers are nothing but rot-gut whiskey with a fancy label and a promise to cure all ills. Let's say you're unlucky enough to need surgery. That's where things get truly grim. There's no anesthesia except for a good slug of whiskey, or if you're lucky, enough laudanum to make you half unconscious. You lie down, grit your teeth, and hope you pass out before the saw comes out. The surgeon's tools might get wiped on a shirt sleeve, but nobody's boiling water or worrying about germs. Infection is almost guaranteed. If a limb's crushed or badly broken, amputation is the only option, and you better believe that's done fast and rough. The pain is unimaginable. More often than not, the infection that follows is what kills you, not the original wound. If you're a woman, childbirth is the most dangerous gamble of all. There's no hospital, no prenatal care, and if you're lucky, a midwife lives nearby. More often, it's just your mother or a neighbor. Complications like breech birth or heavy bleeding, things that could be managed today, are life or death emergencies here. In fact, out on the frontier, about 1 in every 100 births ends with the mother dying. Compare that to today, and it's 100 times deadlier. Every pregnancy is a risk, every delivery a coin toss. You'll see men raising children alone, the mother lost to childbirth, and the heartbreak runs deep. Diaries and letters from the time are full of men mourning wives, children growing up without mothers, families broken before they even had a chance. It isn't just the medical care, or lack of it, that wears people down. It's the constant grind against hunger, exhaustion, and the simple reality that your body is always one accident or infection away from disaster. Nutrition is hit or miss. Fresh fruit is rare, meat sometimes spoiled, and there's never quite enough to go around. No vitamins, no supplements, no clean running water. Kids who survive past childhood are considered lucky. But even then, most folks feel old and battered before they've hit 50. If you make it past 40, you're already ahead of most. But let me tell you, the physical toll is only half the story. The real shock for newcomers, like you, is the suffocating isolation. You're used to sending a letter and hearing back in days, maybe sharing news with a phone call or a quick visit. Out here, communication crawls along at the speed of a tired horse. Mail takes weeks or months, and that's only if a storm or bandits don't get to it first. You might not hear about a family death or a national crisis until it's old news. Everything outside your small corner of the world feels distant, almost meaningless compared to the tasks at hand. This isolation shapes people. For women especially, those who grew up surrounded by family and friends in the East, it can be a quiet torment. Husbands are gone for days or weeks, searching for supplies or working odd jobs. The women left behind often go days without speaking to another adult. Diaries from the time are full of aching loneliness, the kind that seeps into your bones. There's even a name for it: prairie madness. You might start to feel it yourself. The endless horizon pressing in, the wind howling outside your one-room cabin, the nearest neighbor miles away. Some folks crack under the pressure, depression, anxiety, sometimes worse. You'll hear stories of violence breaking out, or of someone slipping off in the night, never to return. Some just head back east, the isolation too much to bear. Even when you do have neighbors, getting to them isn't easy. A visit might mean walking or riding several miles, and with chores piling up, there's rarely time for such luxuries. Social gatherings are few and far between. Maybe the church organizes a potluck, or the community comes together for a barn raising or a harvest. But most days, you're on your own. Church isn't just a place for worship out here. It's the heart of the community. Even if you're not religious, you'll find yourself drawn in by the promise of company, a shared meal, a chance to talk to someone new. Ministers, priests, and preachers do more than deliver sermons. They teach, mediate disputes, organize events, and sometimes even act as doctors or lawmen. Building a school or a church means more than just putting up walls and a roof. It's a declaration you're here to stay. You're not just passing through, hoping to strike it rich and move on. These institutions bind people together, turning a scattered collection of shacks into a real town with a future. When folks come together to form a local government, it's not about politics as you know it. It's about survival, about making sure someone's in charge when disaster strikes. Despite all the talk about rugged individualism, nobody survives out here alone for long. You'll hear stories of lone gunmen and stoic pioneers. But the truth is, cooperation is the only way through. When a family needs to build a barn, half the town shows up, raising beams and hammering boards in a single day. When the crops are ready, neighbors form a harvest team, moving from field to field before the weather can ruin everything. If a child goes missing, everyone drops what they're doing to search the woods and prairies, sometimes for days on end. These acts of mutual aid aren't just neighborly, they're absolutely necessary. No one family can handle the worst the frontier throws at them. It's this push and pull between self-reliance and community that shapes the culture of the West. You need grit to survive day to day. But when disaster strikes, you need your neighbors just as much. The legends say it's all about the lone hero, but real life out here is built on shared labor, shared grief, and shared hope. The people who last in these parts are the ones who can both look after themselves and lean on others when the need arises. So as you sit by the fire at the end of another punishing day, the raw truth of frontier life settles over you. You start to realize it takes incredible mental and emotional strength to keep going year after year, when every day brings new risks and fresh losses. The folks who make it aren't superheroes. They're ordinary men and women who stumble, fall, grieve, and somehow find the will to rise and carry on. Some break under the weight, others adapt, and a few even find purpose and rough joy in the struggle. Out here, heroism isn't a gunfight at high noon. It's getting up every morning, knowing what you're up against, and choosing to carry on anyway. As darkness creeps in and the world goes silent, you're left with your thoughts, and maybe, for the first time, a real sense of what these people endured. What drove them to risk everything for a new start? How did they cope with loss, fear, and loneliness in this hard and unforgiving land? And what would they make of our modern world, with its comforts, abundance, and safety they could barely imagine? Their sacrifices built the foundation of everything you now take for granted, paid for with sweat, suffering, and more than a little blood. These questions drift with you into uneasy sleep, your dreams filled with endless grasslands, wind-scoured plains, and the quiet faces of those who face the Wild West with nothing but their wits and each other to rely on. Not the stuff of Hollywood legend, but a story of quiet heroism, ordinary people surviving against extraordinary odds. And as you rise to face another day, the horizon hinting at pale morning light, you sense a shift in the wind. The community around you, battered but unbroken, readies itself. Because soon, you'll see with your own eyes just how diverse and complicated life out here can be. Dawn breaks on what will be your final day in the Wild West. The sun creeps over the horizon, painting the land in gold. And you stand there, maybe for the first time since your arrival, truly taking in the wild, harsh beauty that pulled so many dreamers and desperados out west. It's quieter than you expected. The wind whistles over endless prairies that seem to roll forever, and distant mountains claw at the morning sky. Canyons split the earth with a kind of indifferent violence. Here, at least, Hollywood didn't exaggerate. The scenery alone is enough to steal your breath. But I have to warn you, don't let the beauty fool you. Out here, nature isn't some benevolent backdrop for adventure or romance. For most folks, it's a resource, nothing more. You might look at a forest and see something worth preserving. That's not how people thought back in the 1870s. Timber crews moved through the woods like locusts, cutting every tree they could get their hands on with barely a second thought about what might grow back. If you ask about conservation, you'd get a blank stare, or maybe a laugh. And it wasn't just the trees. The animals, deer, elk, antelope, and especially the bison, were hunted with a kind of fever. You've probably seen paintings or movies with endless herds of buffalo. The truth is, those herds were almost wiped off the map in a single generation. In the early 1700s, there were tens of millions of bison storming across the plains. By the mid-1880s, you'd be lucky to spot a handful. Now, you might assume this was just about people hunting for food or hides, but that's only part of it. The destruction of the buffalo was deliberate, a weapon in a much bigger war. The US government actually encouraged hunters to slaughter buffalo as a way to break the backbone of the plains tribes. Without the bison, native nations lost their main source of food, clothing, and even shelter, making resistance almost impossible. General Philip Sheridan, a man whose name still raises hackles, is said to have remarked, "Let them kill, skin, and sell until the buffalo is exterminated. It is the only way to bring lasting peace and allow civilization to advance." Whether or not those were his exact words, they capture the cold logic of the era. This was nothing less than environmental warfare. Picture what that meant for native communities. The West wasn't just a home, it was the center of their universe, economically, spiritually, culturally. Losing the land and the bison meant losing everything. For some, the first contacts with settlers involved trade and careful negotiation, maybe even moments of friendship. But by the 1870s, most tribes faced a brutal triad of choices: give up everything for a plot of land on a reservation, fight against an enemy with overwhelming firepower, or try to disappear into the new, civilized world. The reservation system may sound like a compromise, but it was really another form of violence. Native children were ripped from their families, their hair cut short, their languages banned. In government boarding schools, the motto was, "To kill the Indian, save the man." Captain Richard Pratt, who ran one of the most notorious schools, didn't mince words about it. Kids weren't just losing their homes, they were losing their very identities. And the trauma from those years still lingers in families and communities today. Some nations kept up the fight longer than others. You might have heard of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, when Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors defeated Custer's 7th Cavalry in 1876. For a brief moment, it looked like the old ways might endure. But the US response was brutal. Villages burned, families scattered, and the last strongholds eventually crushed. The story of the West is shot through with tragedy and loss, much of it hidden behind the myths. But the land wasn't just a battleground between natives and settlers. The West drew people from all corners of the world, and every one of them brought their own customs, languages, and hopes. This wasn't the Hollywood version of a town with only rough-talking cowboys and silent sheriffs. In some settlements, you could hear a dozen languages spoken in a single day. Not that this diversity always meant harmony. Scarcity breeds suspicion, and nowhere was this clearer than in the treatment of Chinese immigrants. These workers built the railroads and dug deep into the mountains for gold and silver, often under brutal conditions. Yet as soon as they started to succeed, resentment flared. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was the first major law that singled out a group by nationality. But discrimination had been festering long before then. Chinese miners were forced off their claims, sometimes by taxes, sometimes by outright violence. Chinatown sprang up in pockets of relative safety, but every economic downturn brought new waves of riots and expulsions. Sometimes entire communities would be driven out overnight, their homes burned to the ground. Mexican Americans, too, found themselves on the wrong side of shifting borders and broken promises. After the Mexican-American War, many families became US citizens overnight, but that never stopped powerful newcomers from snatching away their land. Treaties that were supposed to protect their property rights were ignored or twisted in court. Even water rights, carefully managed for generations, were swept away as American law replaced older systems that actually worked in the desert. And then there were the Europeans. You might imagine they all blended together, but the reality was more complicated. German, Irish, Scandinavian, and Jewish immigrants formed tight-knit enclaves, each clinging to their native traditions. Sometimes they found support in these communities. Other times, they became targets for nativist anger whenever jobs ran short or crops failed. African Americans, too, came west after the Civil War, looking for a new start. Some became cowboys, about a quarter of all cattle hands, a fact you'll almost never see in the movies. Others tried their luck as homesteaders, building new towns on the prairies. Yet even here, racism didn't disappear. Black families faced legal obstacles and sometimes outright hostility from white neighbors determined to keep them out. All these different groups, each with their own histories, beliefs, and ambitions, collided and jostled for space on a land that was already scarred by violence and exploitation. The idea of the West as a melting pot sounds nice, but the reality was far messier. Cultures mixed, but some were ground down while others rose to dominate. whose stories survived depended on who held the power. It's easy, looking back, to get lost in the legends. But if you'd actually tried to make a life here, you'd have seen the fractures everywhere, in the land, in the towns, in the families, forced to choose between old ways and new laws. That legacy of conflict and trauma still shapes communities across the West, even now. And as the day wears on, you'll leave these hard truths behind for a moment, stepping into a frontier town that's changing faster than you can keep up. Because next, we'll see how these lived realities were transformed, sometimes polished, sometimes buried, on their way to becoming the myths we know today. By the time the sun starts to dip low, you're standing at the edge of a frontier town in the thick of transformation. A place and a time that's shifting under your boots, even as you try to get your bearings. Maybe you arrived expecting dust, gunfights, and a handful of wild-eyed miners. Instead, you're caught in the churn of the 1870s and 1880s, watching the old world of lone prospectors and small homesteads gradually disappear beneath the weight of something bigger, colder, and more organized. You notice the changes everywhere. Just a few years earlier, the biggest thing moving across this land was a wagon train, slow as molasses and vulnerable to every hardship the prairie could throw at it. Now, the iron rails of the Transcontinental Railroad, finished in 1869, slice through the landscape. What used to take months by oxen and sheer stubbornness now takes days by train. And it's not just this one line. Branch lines snake out, reaching into valleys and canyons that once felt like the last outposts of civilization. That railroad doesn't just bring people, it brings the East. It brings massive crates of mass, produced goods, canned peaches, cast iron stoves, bolts of cloth with patterns you've never seen in your life. The stores fill up with things made in distant factories, but it goes both ways. The railroad hauls ore, timber, cattle, and grain back east at a scale no lone gold panner or family farm can match. You can see how the rules of the game are changing, and not in your favor if you came here hoping to make it big on your own. The little guy, the one with the pickaxe and a claim staked by sweat and luck, gets swallowed up by mining companies with deeper pockets and more lawyers. Family farms get boxed in by huge agricultural outfits, sometimes run by men who rarely set foot outside a city. Cattle barons, backed by investors you'll never meet, fence off waterholes and grazing land, squeezing out the small rancher with little more than a handful of steers and a lot of hope. Money talks, and it talks loud in these parts. The railroad men, timber companies, mining syndicates, they don't just control business. They start to pull the strings in local politics. You see it in how water rights, land grants, timber cuts, and mineral claims are handed out. It isn't the hardest worker or most desperate family who gets the best land. It's the man with connections, a fat wallet, or a friend in the territorial government. You might have pictured the West as a free-for-all, a place where any drifter with enough grit could carve out a life. But what you're seeing now is the West getting organized, regulated, and domesticated. First, the town builds a bank. Then comes a school with a bell that rings through the morning mist. Churches get planted, stained glass shining in the harsh prairie light. Newspapers, theaters, and even fraternal lodges pop up, promising a taste of the civilization folks thought they'd left behind. The streets are no longer just muddy tracks worn by wagon wheels. Surveyors lay out neat grids. Eventually, you'll see wooden sidewalks replaced by planks, then by stone or even brick. Saloon brawls and shootouts still happen, but now there's a town marshal, sometimes even a full police force. Ordinances go up. No shooting in the street, no cattle blocking Maine, no gambling after midnight. What once felt wild starts to look an awful lot like the places people fled. You hear old-timers grumble about it in the corner of the general store. "Wasn't what I came here for," one mutters as he counts his coins for a sack of flour. Some folks just keep pushing west, always searching for that next patch of untamed land, always hoping to stay ahead of the creeping order. Others, less lucky or less stubborn, try to adapt, though the rules never seem to favor them for long. This is more than an economic shift. It's a change in the very spirit of the place. The myth of the free frontier starts to slip away, and it leaves a lot of folks uneasy. When the 1890 census finally declares the frontier closed, it's not just a statistic. It's a psychological gut punch for people whose whole identity was wrapped up in the idea of wild possibility. And then there's the matter of violence, the part of the story Hollywood loves to romanticize. You probably showed up with visions of famous gunfighters, larger than life and quick on the draw. Let me tell you, the period when those legends actually walked the streets was short and messy. In the early days, before courts and sheriffs, folks handled their grievances with a gun or a rope. By the 1880s and 1890s, though, even the roughest towns have police, judges, and jailhouses. Sure, in the farthest reaches, you might still see vigilante justice, maybe a lynching when tempers flare and the law's a day's ride away. But for the most part, the days of settling everything with bullets are fading fast. Think of the names you know: Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, Jesse James. They weren't comic book heroes, nor were they the pure villains, sometimes painted by their enemies. Hickok, for all his reputation, killed bystanders in more than one gunfight. Earp wore a badge, but he also gambled, ran saloons, and sometimes operated outside the law. Jesse James? He was no Robin Hood. He was a Confederate guerrilla, and his robberies left plenty of innocent folks dead. The line between lawman and outlaw was often nothing more than a matter of whose side you were on that day. But you wouldn't know that from the stories that get told after the dust settles. As you sit by the window, watching lanterns flicker across the street, you start to realize the West you thought you knew is already being replaced, first by the march of industry, then by the power of myth. Why do you think people are so drawn to a version of the West that never really was? Let me ask you, why did folks back east, and later the whole world, fall in love with this idea of a noble, savage, lawless West? Why do we keep telling ourselves these stories? Part of it is timing. The biggest wave of myth-making didn't happen during the wildest days, but just as the real frontier was vanishing. Look at Buffalo Bill Cody and his Wild West show in the 1880s. He brought Indian battles and stagecoach robberies to life, right in front of cheering crowds in Chicago or New York. The telegraph wires and train timetables were making the West smaller and tamer. But the appetite for stories of wild freedom only grew. The dime novels that filled shelves back east weren't written by grizzled cowboys or battered miners. They were churned out by city writers who'd never spent a night in a sod house. Their stories were all high drama and clean morals, heroes and villains, good and evil, all told in black and white. The West became a stage for American virtues, self-reliance, courage, the triumph of the lone individual. Later, Hollywood would take these paper legends and turn them into moving pictures: lonely cowboys, brave sheriffs, dastardly outlaws, and, yes, savage Indians. The movies polished the myth, making it cleaner, simpler, and more reassuring. But why? These myths served a purpose. They let Americans believe their character was forged by hardship, that expansion was not just inevitable, but right. The stories made it seem like taming the land, defeating its people, and building something new was destiny, not conquest. Every time a cowboy triumphed over a villain with righteous violence, it told audiences that America, too, had the moral right to expand, to conquer, to lead. Here's what those stories leave out. The real West was complicated and messy. There was brutality, sometimes outright genocide against native peoples. There was exploitation, immigrants and laborers living and dying in mines and rail camps. There was environmental devastation, whole hillsides stripped bare for timber or silver. There was corruption, with corporations buying influence and bending the law. Communities weren't united. They were divided by race, class, and ambition, struggling to figure out what kind of society they wanted to build. You want simple lessons? You won't find any out here. The frontier was a place of constant adaptation, sometimes cooperation, sometimes cutthroat competition, sometimes outright cruelty. Human nature, at its best and worst, played out every day. The real story isn't about who won the gunfight or struck gold, but about how ordinary people, men, women, and children from all over the world, managed to survive, sometimes even thrive, in the face of endless hardship. Now, as you stand in the growing dusk, you feel the weight of it. The world you thought you understood has become more complicated, more human, and somehow both more tragic and more inspiring. You start to wonder if you, with your modern comforts and assumptions, would last even a single day out here. Maybe you'd manage a week, but I doubt it. Out here, you have to know how to fix a wagon axle, trade with strangers, shoot straight, patch a wound, keep a fire going in a blizzard, and read the weather from nothing but the sky. You need resilience, not just toughness, but a willingness to adapt, to cooperate, to endure loneliness and uncertainty. Yet, for all its hardships, there's something that keeps drawing us back. Maybe it's the raw honesty, tasks that matter, consequences that are immediate. Maybe it's the way people depended on each other to survive, building communities out of necessity rather than choice. Maybe it's the reminder that humans can stand up to almost anything when they have to, and sometimes even find moments of meaning and beauty in the struggle. And don't think the legacy of all this vanished with the last cattle drive. The rules we play by today, how we own land, use water, manage resources, balance federal and state power, all have their roots in the battles and bargains of the frontier. The mix of cultures that defines America today owes a lot to the rough coexistence, forced or willing, of people who met here. Even our endless debates, freedom versus responsibility, local control versus national unity, exploitation versus conservation, echo with the voices of those long ago arguments. If you want to understand what this era meant to everyone, you can't just look at it from one angle. For native peoples, the frontier wasn't a story of freedom or progress. It was devastation, the loss of land, language, and ancient traditions. Their survival is a story of resilience against overwhelming odds, a struggle that isn't over even now. Their perspective reminds us that beneath every myth of triumph is a record of what was lost, sometimes forever. You have to hold all these truths at once: the courage of settlers, the suffering of the displaced, the creativity, and the destruction. That's the only way to come close to understanding what the West really was. Night falls for the last time on your stay in this raw, unforgiving place. You lie down in whatever shelter you've managed, maybe a bunkhouse, a tent, or a rough-hewn room above the saloon. The wind whispers through the grass outside. Coyotes call somewhere far off, and maybe, if you listen closely, you can hear a piano carrying a melody out through the darkness, fragile, hopeful, defiant. These are the sounds that everyone here heard, no matter their origins. The sky is vast and impossibly dark, the stars cold and bright. They're the same stars that guided wagon trains, that marked the seasons for farmers, that comforted homesick newcomers who wondered if they'd ever see home again. Tomorrow, you'll step back into your own time, changed. You'll never watch a Western or pick up a dime novel without thinking of the truth behind the legend. You'll realize just how much you take for granted: the food on your table, the roof over your head, the safety of your streets. You'll notice how few people today know how to build, grow, or fix anything with their own hands. The self-sufficiency that was once the only way to survive is now a rarity, almost a lost art. But most of all, you'll remember, not the gunfights or gold strikes, but the daily struggle. The men and women, the children, the immigrants and the indigenous, the free and the desperate, all facing down a landscape that didn't care if they lived or died. They made mistakes, they suffered, they sometimes triumphed, and their stories, unvarnished, contain more courage, cruelty, kindness and contradiction than any Hollywood script could ever capture. Their legacy isn't just in the stories we tell or the movies we watch. It's in the towns and laws and landscapes that still bear the marks of their struggle. The Wild West as they knew it faded long ago, replaced by cities, highways, and managed land. But the echoes linger, in stubborn local traditions, in how people see themselves, and in the questions we still ask about what freedom, community, and survival really mean. As you finally drift off, the boundary between past and present blurs. The questions that haunted those early settlers, how to live with the land, how to build community, how to balance self-interest with survival, haven't gone away. They just take new forms. Maybe the greatest legacy of the frontier isn't a set of answers, but a set of questions, ones each generation has to answer for itself. Above you, the same stars shine, cold and clear. The same constellations that once promised hope to weary travelers now remind you of the thin line between survival and disaster, between myth and reality. In the hush of the prairie night, you feel a connection, a fleeting kinship, with everyone who ever faced this land's challenges. For a moment, you're part of something bigger, a story both harsh and beautiful. Sleep takes you at last, carrying you into dreams of a West that was never simple, never gentle, but always more real, more human than any legend. Out here, stripped of all illusion, you glimpsed what it truly means to endure, to adapt, and to find meaning, even in the harshest conditions imaginable.